Welcome to our continuing series on the NBA previews for season 2021-2022. My name's Jared Prosser. I'm here with Carl Heiser. Today, it is our Don't Get Fired episode. We talk about the boss's team, the Boston Celtics. Carl, how do we approach this with kids' gloves?
This is going to be difficult. I do kind of feel like I'm walking the tightrope a little bit with how I talk about this team, but I'm going to be honest, and hopefully that doesn't get me fired. So,
yeah, I look a little bit of inside information here, but the boss is currently on holidays over in Las Vegas. So hopefully he's in a good mood when he sees all this and forgives us for anything negative we say about his beloved Celtics. But before we get on to this season, we do have to cover something negative about him, and that is last season. Carl, run us through that anything that could go wrong did go wrong campaign.
Last season for the Celtics was an utter disappointment. Most people, I believe, would have projected this team to be a top 3 team in the Eastern Conference because that's what we've come to expect. They got the 7th seed in the East. They only won 36 games. They were a 500 team, and
yeah, they backed their way into that 7th seed too. Like it wasn't like they came charging towards it. They really sort of fell into the 7th.
10 a year, definitely not a positive ending to the season for them. And then they got matched up. The problem with getting the 7th seed is that they got matched up with the Brooklyn Nets in the first round of the playoffs, and that is not a recipe for success for anybody. So
was for Kyrie Irving.
Yeah, I can't even talk about Kyrie Irving right now. That's a whole can of worms we can't afford to get into. But
he may get assassinated the next time he goes to Boston after his little performance at the center circle.
Well,
not advocating that people just be clear.
That's if he even plays this season. So
at this stage, it might be a while. So the Celtics made some changes starting right at the top. Let's go through those.
They did, yeah. So Brad Stevens essentially fired himself and then rehired himself as the GM. I don't even know what he is at this point, but
as whatever Danny Ainge used to be.
Whatever Danny Ainge used to, yeah. So he's kind of running the show up top, and that resulted in some interesting moves. They traded Kemba Walker away and brought in Moses Brown, I believe, from that trade, and then did they also get
draft picks
from that trade, or was that a separate trade? But at some point
that was separate.
At some point they brought in Al Horford, so. That's a move, I guess, Brad Stevens.
It is definitely a move.
Yeah. And then they, with Brad Stevens stepping down as the head coach, they hired Ime Udoka as their new head coach. Udoka was an assistant coach with Brooklyn, I believe. He was an assistant coach.
Yeah, spent some time at the Spurs as well as an assistant. He's very, very highly regarded.
Yeah, so I would say good hire, but again, doesn't really have any head coaching experience. So we'll see how that goes for him. It is a high profile job in Boston, and the expectations are certainly pretty high. So the pressure's on. But I think as far as hiring somebody with no head coaching experience, I do think they did a good job.
Yeah. So who did they? We mentioned they got rid of Kemba. Who else did they lose?
Taco Fall. That's too bad. Fan favorite.
How will they get over that?
I don't know how. It's a difficult loss for sure. They lost Evan Fournier, who was he was a rental. I don't think I don't think anybody really expected him to sign an extension there. They lost.
Interesting that he's rejoined with Kemba as well.
Yeah, they found themselves. They're star-crossed, I guess. And then they sort of on the fringes, they lost Semi Ojeleye and Tremont Waters. Tremont Waters was a 2nd-round draft pick, I think, a couple of years ago out of LSU.
Yeah, two-way player, I think.
Mm-hmm. So those are their losses. And then as far as people they brought in, we already mentioned Horford and Moses Brown off of trades. They re-signed Marcus Smart to an extension. They They signed Dennis Schroeder, who was coming off maybe the worst financial decision of his life.
Maybe.
Turned down an $85 million extension with Los Angeles, seeking $100 million, and got nowhere close to that. Nowhere close.
1 year. What's he on? 1 year, $5 million or something like that.
He might be on the mid-level exception. It's really quite a fall there. But they re-signed Robert Williams to be their center. They signed Josh Richardson, who's a very electric, athletic player. So I like what he brings to the table. I think coming off the bench he'll be good for them. They also bring in Ryan Arcidiacono as a backup guard.
You have to, if you're in Boston, you have to get a gritty third string white point guard, sure.
Right, you do.
He fulfills that obligation to the fans.
Yeah, it's true. Well, they already have Peyton Pritchard, so we'll see what kind of role he falls into. But
he's too good to be the gritty third string, though.
It's true.
He's someone who has genuine expectations.
Mm-hmm.
So let's move on to who the main man will be in Boston this year. They're clearly a team that's headed by two superstars, or two genuine, potential superstars. But who out of the two of them do you think will be the key man in Boston?
So this is the Tatum and Brown show in Boston, as it has been for the last couple of seasons. I would give the edge to Jason Tatum.
Yeah.
Jaylen Brown would be the number one player, I think, on most other teams, but here I do think he plays second fiddle to Tatum. Tatum averaged 26 points and 7 rebounds last year. Had a really solid year as far as efficiency goes, shot 38% from three. And he's, Jaylen Brown he's a great player, don't get me wrong, but Jason Tatum gives you legitimate, 40 points a night potential on any given night. And I think with the versatility that he provides, he can play the small forward, he can play power forward. I think he is the go-to player for them, and still only 23, 24, which is incredible to think, because he's essentially a veteran at this point in his career, and still quite young, and still some room to grow.
Yeah, it does feel like they've both been around for quite a while now. It's such a boon for the Celtics. We hear teams so often talk about wanting to get superstar big two-way wings, and Boston have two of them, and they're both so young and so accomplished already. They've got a really good base to build a team around, and last season was a disappointment, clearly, but surely they can't be too far away from getting back into what they were, just with those two to build upon it. It's such an advantage that they have that a lot of teams don't. But enough about the main man. Who is that swing player? Who's the X factor for the C's this year?
There's a lot of direction this could go with the Celtics. I think with what Jaylen Brown being what he is, I don't necessarily think he's a swing player where the team's...
He's almost too good for that.
Yeah, he is too good for that. So that's kind of where I have been given pause and thinking of who even the next guy would be. I'm almost considering Moses Brown as the swing player, but to be honest with you, I don't really know who the swing player is, because it is the two-man show down there, and we kind of know exactly what to expect from Tatum and Brown as far as their performance goes.
It is a tough one, because they do have those two pillars, but then does Time Lord continue his development? And he's a good shot blocker. He can run the floor. He's a really good passer. He's almost a Bam Adebayo light in a way. He's got that sort of potential. You mentioned Al Horford right at the top. What does he have left at this stage of his career? How does the two-headed monster of Marcus Smart, who finally has his contract and his big contract in his starting role, how does that mesh with Dennis Schroeder, who is going to be out for revenge? So there are a lot of questions, a lot of X factors that can go one way or the other with this team. But you're right, Carl. It's hard to put one of those above another. Now, how do the young guys come through? We mentioned Pritchard before, but Aaron Neesmith, who personally I haven't been all that high on, but in preseason he's looked quite good. Now, how do these young guys come through as well?
Yeah, Pritchard was quite impressive last season.
Yeah, I do like
him. Considering just where he was drafted, and he made the most out of his opportunities for sure, and is now a solid rotational player for the Celtics who can really contribute. And he was a 4-year player too, and with those it's kind of hit or miss, but he was definitely a hit in that draft. And then Aaron Neesmith, I was pretty high on him coming out of Vanderbilt just because he can really shoot the ball. And he shot something like, 50% from 3-point range, which I don't think it's fair to necessarily expect that every season. That's
longer line as well. It's a different sport.
Yeah, and probably within a standard deviation of where we can expect him to be. But yeah, if Pritchard continues to be just that gritty guard that he was last year, who hits threes and plays tough defense, and Neesmith becomes the shooter that I think they wanted him to be coming out of the draft, then we are looking at this team, really getting into the mix, because we know that Tatum and Brown are going to be excellent. I think we can expect that. But what it comes down to for this team is how does the rest of the supporting cast play? Does Dennis Schroeder play, pissed off because, he has something to prove now?
And what does that mean if he plays pissed off? Does that mean he looks to take over the offense too much, or does he focus more and become an excellent facilitating point guard who plays pesky defense and hits open shots? How does that anger from missing out on $80 million, which is an anger that you and I, Carl, will probably never experience. But how does that manifest itself? There's so many questions upon questions here. Touching on Neesmith again, now you're a bit younger than me, obviously, but does the name Trajan Langdon ring any bells to you?
The name sounds familiar, but I don't know that I could place the name.
Star shooter in college, maybe 15, 20 years ago, drafted by the Cavs, a late lottery pick. I think he was 11th or 12th pick. Similar to Neesmith, who I think was the 14th pick a couple of seasons ago. Mm-hmm. And Langdon was like a pure stroke, a wonderful jump shooter, but did literally nothing else. Didn't play defense, didn't pass the ball, wasn't a great athlete, but by God, could he shoot it. He would have been much better in today's game than what he was back then. But Neesmith, I still don't think Langdon would have been a 10-year NBA player. He just didn't do enough other stuff. Neesmith gave me those sort of vibes. You mentioned you were really high on him. I was really low on him. I looked at him and thought that is Trajan Langdon Mark II. But he I've watched a couple of Celtics preseason games and he's looked really sprightly. He's added some layers to his game. He's got a lot more pop athletically than I saw last season. So the Celtics may have themselves a genuine, let's face it, on a team with Tatum and Brown, you don't need your two guard to be all that creative. You just need them to play passable defense and hit open shots. And I think they may have themselves a genuine starting two there.
I would agree. I think from what I remember, one of the big concerns with him coming into the draft was that he did have an excellent shooting season in his, I believe it was his sophomore year for Vanderbilt, but he got injured and missed the last half of the season. So I think he's just now starting to get back some of that athleticism that he had before. And we talk about him like he had a bad year last year. He still shot 37% from 3-point range. Like he wasn't.
He just barely got on the court.
That was the thing, and he's still a capable basketball player. I do think the expectations in Boston are usually fairly high for the players that they bring in, and it is very difficult to carve out a role in Boston because they have drafted well over the last few years and are quite a deep team with young players. They had Carson Edwards and Tremont Waters and Peyton Pritchard and Romeo Langford like all at once. And so who's going to step up and be the guy to come out of that whole mess?
Someone's due to pop.
Right. It's difficult to break into the rotation in Boston. Yeah. It's not an easy task at all, but with how Neesmith has played in the preseason, I like him to find some sort of role for himself.
Yeah, he's better than I thought he was. Not that that's the be-all and end-all. I'm sure that's what he plays his NBA career for, to prove some random Australian guy wrong. But let's tie all this up. What do you think Boston will do this season? And remember, Trey is watching.
Yeah. Hi, Trey. I'm gonna give the Celtics
70 wins.
Yeah, probably not. But there's a non-zero chance, I guess, that happens. I'll slide them in at the 4 or the 5 seed in the East. This team is not as good as the Nets. They're not. I still don't think that they'll be as good as the 76ers, even with some of the drama going on in Philadelphia. Yeah. But Philadelphia, they won the Eastern Conference last year, even with all this nonsense going on. So
number 1 seed, yeah.
And the Bucks are still there. So I think 4th, 5th is probably a fair spot to put Boston.
Yeah, I agree. So that will do it for this version of our NBA preseason previews for Vendetta Sports Media. That's the Boston Celtics all wrapped up. For Carl Heiser, I'm Jared Prosser. I'll get that one right. And we will see you for our next preview.